Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me, and thank you guys for being here on this Friday afternoon. It's a full room, great looking room.
Mhm. Especially it's right before a holiday. So again, we all have to invest in ourselves. And so again, I just commend everyone for taking that time to invest in yourselves. So thank you for joining us. So I want to start by just having you. I know I just did a bit of a background. I told a little bit about your background, but maybe you can just share with us a little bit about your career story. And if you think about the theme, Black resistance, because I know you've had to resist probably a good bit through your career. So maybe can you talk about that in your career journey?
So first of all, again, thank you all for being here, and thank you, Alita, for inviting me to be here on the stage with you and to represent Cisco in this way. When I think about my career, and we've talked a little bit about, like, you can go to LinkedIn and see the bio, but I actually have, one of the cool things is I came to Atlanta from the University of Southern Mississippi to be a developer. So I've actually had a full spectrum career, I believe. I started off my career as a software developer. I did architecture, I did project program management. And then I decided somewhere along the journey, when I switched from Accenture after 12 years and went to Amdocs, that I had probably BS my way enough, bachelor's of science, not but in saying that, I was like, I needed to know something different. So I chose to go and do an MBA. But when I was there, I found out that I really loved operations and that I loved understanding, working with the business and really solving business problems. And when I think about overall CIO objectives, I think about being connected to purpose, invested in people, and optimized for agility. And so I really learned that that was what I was passionate about. So I moved to ADP, and one of the cool things, if you look at my bio, I've worked for 3 companies that all start with the letter A, and Cisco is my first time moving past A on the alphabet. And so I went to ADP. I led operations there, but I also led a little bit of technology. And when I joined Cisco, interestingly enough, I was asked to come to the Cisco IT organization to lead operations. But after a year, we had some organizational changes. And through those organizational changes, I think I kind of got back to my first love, which is software development. So I now lead a group of engineers that was mentioned before. But when I think about Black resistance, I think about how this whole journey started for me. And when I was in high school, and again, I'm from Mississippi, I remember I was taking the ASVAB to get out of class. And, one of my good friends, she went to the Army, was going to the Army. And when all right, we got out of class, we went and took the test. Fine. The next opportunity to get out of class, we're seniors, or like juniors or seniors. The next opportunity was to go to talk to the recruiters. And I remember talking to the recruiters, and I distinctly remember talking to one of the Marine recruiters, and he was like, you have some really good scores. You could do just about anything that you want to do, except be an engineer. And so the except actually stuck with me. And just a little bit about family background. Again, my grandfather and my parents were factory workers. Knew I was going to college, had a different trajectory. But then I found out, like, the only advanced classes I took in high school was math. And it was just my thing. Like, I was in calculus, I was doing all the advanced math classes, and it didn't make sense to me when I did a little research why I couldn't do engineering. And being from a great Southern Baptist family, and my parents had always told me, with God, all things are possible, it's like, what's this thing I can't do? And let me go prove these people wrong. So therefore, I literally turned in from what I always say sometimes when people tell you and plant seeds, and it could be to harm you. But this one was really to move me, because what it allowed me to do is I realized that there was money for girls who look like me, who like math. I found out that I actually thrived in it. The second semester of my sophomore year, I ended up working working as a co-op student. So, like, I wasn't supposed to work. My parents, we had this agreement. I was just going to go to school and I would work during the summers, but I ended up getting this co-op at Georgia Pacific. So I actually worked in their IT department, fixing our computers, doing software, and it just became easy to me. And it just led me to Atlanta and started my career. So it's one of those things when I think about Black resistance, it was like, all right, tell me I can't do something, and I'm probably going to go figure out why I can't.
That's my kind of girl right there. Tell me I can't do something. That's my motivation. So, you mentioned that your parents were both factory workers, and we come from similar backgrounds. I also would say, though, as I think about where I am now, I think about Black resistance, on the whole, it's my family, it's my parents, it's my grandparents who work those jobs. My grandfather worked 3 jobs basically to just help support his family. And so they are the reasons we sit here today, right? But are there particular stories that you take from your family or lessons that just sort of help drive your career in terms of just, continue to push you forward, or just things that you can share with the group?
I think the story that resonates most, Alita, when I think about it, is literally my grandfather. You talked about, it's the grandfathers and the parents. It's like one of the things about my grandfather, and I still to this day, I get puzzled. So my grandfather, being of course, a Black man in Mississippi, when he was 35 with his first wife, because he later, his first wife passed away, and then he would later marry my grandmother, but he went out and purchased 55 acres of land. And, I was like, okay, we just knew it was the farm. I didn't realize this until my grandmother passed away, the impact and because this was a man who I always heard couldn't read or write. Like his children read the Bible to him. And he also had prepared a will. And in that will, he was very distinguished, like, okay, it's going to go to my grandmother first. After his second wife passed, it was going to go to all of his children. And he just had some intentionality that I couldn't understand. And I was also sitting there thinking, because my dad happened to be the executor of his estate. So of course that meant I'm helping my dad be the executor of his estate. And we're going down the courthouse and we're looking through this paperwork. And I'm just thinking how intentional he was about leaving that legacy for not just his children, but his children's children. And for me, I just really thought about like the stories I hear about him. He wasn't just a man who sold produce. He also gave a lot back to the community. If you couldn't eat, you knew where you could eat, right? He was that type of person. And he also had a certain level of respect for authority that was very important. And there's all these stories of like, if he disagreed with the pastor, he wouldn't go and argue like we do today in some of our churches. Like literally, my mom, like my dad would tell the stories of, and my aunts and uncles of, you just notice that as all of a sudden he'd get up, grab his hat, tip out the back door. And then you'd ask him why you left. Oh, that wasn't right. There was something he said wasn't right, but he wasn't going to stand up, disrespect him or anything. He was like, I'm not going to sit here for this. So it's just like stories like that. But I think learning that history and learning how much intentionality he had for his children and his grandchildren, that took a lot of resistance and courage. And, it took some intelligence that, education is a big value that I take away from that.
Yeah, that's what it's amazing too, because I know that, as we think about our families and ancestors, there's so much invisible work, like, again, the intentionality, and you saw them doing things and you didn't know why they were doing that, or that doesn't make sense. And then it's just, now that you see like, wow, that was really smart. And, whether people had formal education or not, they were very intelligent, right? They were very calculating, very strategic. So thank you for sharing that. So shift a bit, we're sort of on the same line, thinking about like role models, right? So oftentimes, like, I got a bunch of role models, and the people who come up, the Obamas and folks like that. But, can you talk a little bit about your role models? It could be teachers or anybody that just have impacted you.
So, that's a very interesting question, because I had to think about that one for a while. And other than my parents and my grandparents and family life, I didn't really have a lot of role models, if I were to be honest. I had an aunt who was a math teacher, but, she helped me a lot with math. And, I always tell her today, I was like, girl, I think I was the engineer because you broke down math to me. It helped me to understand. But when I got into the professional world, there just weren't a lot of people in the room that looked like me, and there weren't role models. I think Ursula Burns, of course, was the first role model that I had, because she was an engineer, right? And a Black woman. And she was the first person that I could actually see somewhat of a distance that probably had that career goal and trajectory. And later in life, Carla Harris, I've learned. And then there's some local heroes too that I think about for all you who have traveled in. Like, for example, one of my big mentors is James Dallas, and he lives here in Atlanta. He's a former CIO at Georgia Pacific, and he's also a former CIO at Medtronics. And he has poured a lot into me in my career as a Black woman in technology over the last years. And then also, if you ever have an opportunity to meet Chloe Barzay, who works for Accenture, she's also absolutely amazing and has continued to pour into me over the last few years.
So just to follow up on that question, as you identify role models, and maybe some of those you might even consider sponsors, like how did you go about networking and building those nets? We're here to network, right? How did you go about building those relationships? Were you purposeful? Did you just sort of stumble into those, relationships?
That's a great question. One was stumbled into when I think about the local heroes, and one was intentional. And one of the things I'll tell you when we go back to family values, and if you've ever heard, like in the Black community, especially in coming from Mississippi, sometimes they tell you those people ain't your friends, and you keep your head down and you do your work and you do what you got to do. So I spent 7-8 years of my career at Accenture with my head down, getting my work done. And to the point that I remember very distinctly, when I was talking to, Chloe and one of the leaders, they were like, you weren't on the radar. I was like, what radar? And it was like, because I had not networked and been very intentional. So I stumbled on some people who stumbled onto me and like, oh, this girl's kind of good. I had the right people in my circle because I executed, but it played into my career because I could make consultant, I could make manager. I stayed at manager probably way longer than I probably should have because I didn't understand the power of networking because it was considered brown nosing and like I ain't got time. I'm gonna go to work, do my job. The code is good, we're good. But so later I became very intentional, and part of the journey when I went to when I left Accenture, actually, I came to the realization that that was my only network, was a bunch of people from Accenture, clients that I had worked with, and ex-Accenture people. And I was like, well, I don't really want to go back to Accenture because I didn't want to sell and I don't want to be a partner. And so therefore I started to be very intentional. And that's when I started to volunteer for Women in Technology. And then when I went and did my MBA, the reason I chose Emory was very intentional because of the fact that they stressed the network and the power of the network. So, and that's later how I met Mr. Dallas and some other leaders in my career who were able to sponsor me. And so I stumbled upon it, and then I later became very intentional.
So I want to just follow up on that a little bit. We just had some conversations around, sort of the unwritten rules of your career, right? Carolyn Wanga spoke during our Black History Month about, job one being fulfilling the obligations of the contract. The contract is the written job description and the things you're hired to do, but there's the unwritten part of your job description that we all have too. And some of us understand that better than others, and some of us understand it earlier than others. And I got a lesson early in my career about that. But can you talk a little bit about that? You just talked about how you kept your head down, and that's what we think. If I show up every day and I do my job and I kill it, I'm going to get promoted. I'm going to move at the promotion velocity at which I'd like to do. But that's not always the case. But can you talk a little bit about the unwritten rules of the contract, or of what you have to do to sort of advance in corporate America?
There's a lot of unwritten rules. I think the biggest one that I had to learn, and this is, again, I'm from the South, y'all. Y'all.
Me too.
Seriously. And one of the things that I had to learn in my career is my grandma and my grandma, both sides, they kept it real straight. And you didn't sugarcoat it. They just told it like it is, right? Tell it like it is. Is that what I said? So the point being is we didn't really like, all right, do you like my dress? No, it's ugly. It's too short. It's too tight. They tell you the truth. And what I found, and which was initial culture shock, is that here I was expected to lie a little bit. And to the point now, I don't really trust, because one of the things I do is when people say, oh, that was a great presentation, what did you like about it? Because it's like, what did you like about it? Because what we get taught as an unwritten rule is to, no matter if you agree with your boss, no matter if you agree with the circumstance, to smile and, respond with positive intent. And I think that was a big one for me. That was like really soon, it was like, all right, you coming across as the angry Black girl. And people really didn't want to hear the truth and how to, because I was like, we still got to be honest, but how to do that in a meaningful way that does not hurt someone's feelings or still encourages them, or not sometimes just to smile and say nothing.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you. So I'm going to shift a bit and sort of, talk about some of the things that are sort of going on today and specifically around like diversity. If we, whatever state you are, especially if you're in one of the southern states, there's a lot going on. We don't have time to talk about all the things that are going on, right? Can you think about like current events and sort of any history lessons that you see there that you feel like are most relevant, and things we should be focusing on or taking away from, or just anything that sort of resonates with you?
Okay. So this
That's
is
a loaded
not,
question.
yeah, this is a loaded question. This is not politically motivated, but Winston Churchill said, if you don't understand your history, it is bound to repeat itself. So
Mhm.
it bothers me when we want to make laws and legislation that minimize, erase our history, Jewish history, Asian American history. That bothers me because you have to just know, again, back to what my grandma said, just tell it like it is. You got to know the truth about where you are, or you'll end up back where you didn't want to be. And one prime example of that, and this is not political, but no matter how you feel about it, there was a 50-year-old law in the United States that was erased, and people like me were like, where did that come from? Well, Roe versus Wade was overturned. And no matter how you feel about it, it was like something that as a people, we were like, oh, we're not thinking about like women's rights to their bodies. But 50 years later, we're not talking about that as history. We weren't celebrating that. And it was kind of like, it was a little, maybe a test question, but it's overturned. And so just thinking about, if you don't watch it, some of those things are going to come back, and you got to be careful.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and those of us that, again, I've been in this DEI space for 8 or 9 years, and I will tell you that, it's certainly concerning. I am proud of the work that Cisco and other companies continue to do around diversity. But you also see that, and those of you who are interested in looking for opportunities, not to toot the Cisco horn, but I am. But I will also say, be aware of the number of companies that made a lot of commitments in 2020 after the murder of George Floyd that are pulling back on those investments right now. I just, as you're thinking about where that next opportunity might be, I would just encourage you to do that research and sort of see where companies really are, and who's putting who's walking the talk, so to speak. So speaking of that, shifting to Cisco in terms of DEI, you and I have partnered on a number of different events. You've been a really amazing partner, and thank you so much for that. But what is your, how would you sort of describe where you feel like Cisco is on our DEI journey?
Well, having worked for some great companies, like all of the companies I've worked for that are in my bio on LinkedIn, they've been really good about diversity. I think the biggest thing about Cisco that's standing out for me is what you mentioned. They're walking the walk and they're showing up. So it's one thing to offer $350 million and drop a check off and walk away, but I feel that we have been very intentional about not just showing up, but investing in the communities that we serve, going out to events like this and dedicating time. I know Alita is relentless. Anytime I can and I'm in town, like, yep, sure, it's fine. I got 20 minutes. We'll go take care of that. But I think that power and inclusive future for all and doing tech for good really resonates. And they're not just writing checks. They're showing up each and every day, and they have leaders like Alita. She mentioned she's over at Social Justice Action #2. They have a leader that's dedicated to running that particular program, and for me, that's really important because there's two things. One, it's beyond just one DE&I officer, because sometimes you get the one person and they're a little team of 2 or 3 that are running it. So now you have teams of people who are very targeted to say, we're going to go increase representation. We're going to go out, like the work that we're doing through 110 initiative and hiring folks who do not have college degrees to come in and train to do tech. Those are really meaningful things in the community. And it's one of the reasons why I'm very honored to say that I'm a Cisconian.
Yes, me too. Absolutely. And just to that point, I took this job as a global DEI talent strategy lead 3 years ago, and it was just me, and now I have a team of 20. So that just shows the investment that we've made there. So I know we're going to move to Q&A. Were there any closing thoughts you would like to share, lead us with? Anything?
I don't think I have any.
Okay.
We can go into Q&A,
All right.
and then if I have something else.
Okay.
All right, guys, so if you haven't already, you can scan at the top right on the banner for some questions, and we have some queued up. We'll take about 2 questions.
All right. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Awesome. Okay. Where do you feel your career will be today if you understood the power of networking earlier?
Oh, girl, I'll be COO. there.
Okay. And if you had the chance, what would you do differently in your 24-year career?
That's a great question because honestly, even though I joke and say, I would have networked, I don't disregard the mistakes that I've made or the challenges that I've had throughout my career, because I think those are the things that have grown me into the person that I am today. So I like people ask that question a lot, like, what would you tell your younger self other than to network and, lift your head up a little bit and talk to some other folks and tell people what you're doing? There's not a lot I would actually go back and change because the mistakes, the bruises, the scars, the tears, they've created the character of Kenyatta today.
That's good. Thank you. And we talked about the different pivots that you're able to make. So what do you feel are some great strategies for someone looking for a career shift into the tech field?
So great question. So number one, this is something that's a personal philosophy, and Alita knows, like behind me in my office, I have this whole picture of limitless. And so I'm a big fan of, if you want to make a career change, if you want to do anything, you got to live life limitlessly. So you got to go after it, but be thoughtful. Talk to people who have made the pivot or the change is number one. Think about what attributes, sometimes it's skill sets if you're more junior, sometimes it's your network, sometimes it's tweaking your resume and telling your story differently. But spend time as you're networking with people who are there and that can help guide you on the pivot or help guide you on that ladder of where you want to go. Because if you're going to make a shift into tech, there's a lot of opportunities now. There are a lot of programs. Women in Technology, she mentioned here in Atlanta, is upskilling, training women. They're doing a lot to kind of move the needle. It's more, but it's the network of like not just saying, hey, I got this new thing on my paper. It's who can help you, who can know you, that can help guide you and say, hey, here's what you need to be doing to get there.
And can I add to that? I also would say to think about your transferable skills. I think too many times we underestimate what skills that we've developed in one area that might be transferable to another discipline or area. So for example, I did my MBA concentrated marketing, and I'm now in HR. If you had asked me, I don't know, 15 years ago, would I ever be in HR? I would be like, HR, they do the comp and the insurance, right? I didn't even understand really what HR did. So just, really being deliberate and thinking about doing almost like a skills inventory to understand like what you have done, what skills you have, and then how those might translate to another role.
I think that's really important because when I think about, like, I started off coding, but now my biggest value, because I don't know the syntax, y'all. My biggest value is really problem solving. I'm always thinking through, because that if then else logic that I learned a long time ago, that's how I'm wired and that's how I think. And so when I think about that whole principle of being limitless, when people tell me, oh, this is the problem, then I start problem solving and thinking through the different scenarios and if then else scenarios and situations of what's going to happen to problem solve to get to that answer. So that's a good point.
Yeah.
And I'll have this be the last question. How would you describe your work-life balance and tips on how you'll navigate as a businesswoman or woman in the business?
We should get Alita to answer this too, because she's spending a lot of time on the plane and coming back and forth to Atlanta. And like, when you here last week? For me, it honestly has become a lot easier now that I've kind of grown through the ranks, because I have an amazing team, right? So if I want to, like this particular event, there's somebody who's going to help me with my speech prep. I got a chief of staff that's going to make sure all the operational stuff, if something happens, somebody's going to stand in. So I'm blessed now where it's a lot easier, so I can actually have a lot better work-life balance than I probably had in the past when I was earlier in my career. One of the things that's really helped me though is having a great partner to do life with. I've been married for 18 years, 19. And we don't have it's who can do it, not, oh, it's your job to do it. It's all right, here's the child, what are we doing? And where are we going? And so I think that's been very helpful, is to have a true partner in that relationship versus the traditional male female role models, I guess you would say.
Yeah. I would just add to that, just trying to, and my team, don't look at me with the side eye when I say this, trying to prioritize and just really think about what's important. We're always trying to reassess our priorities, because what you know is you move into leadership is the list of things to do is not going to get smaller, it's going to get bigger. And so what you have to be able to do is go, okay, I added 3 things. What 3 things can I get rid of? What 3 things can I delegate or pass on to somebody else? So just, really prioritizing. I mean, it really, I think in our environment at Cisco, because we're hybrid and we have the opportunity to work hybrid, that makes an amazing difference, all the difference in the world. So.
And I would say no sometimes. Like I'm having a hard time with that, but I'm getting better with the nose.
Yes. Absolutely.
Thank you so much, ladies. That was amazing.